We're going to take the first couple minutes of this meeting just to check to see that we can have correct volume at the back. So if anybody can just raise their hand, let me know up or down if the volume's good. Up? Sounds good. Okay. So I'll take that as my signal to begin then. So I'd like to call to order the District of Sechelt Special Planning and Community Development Committee meeting for Wednesday, November 22nd. This is a call to order and as well a declaration of conflict for any councillors who feel they have something they may need to declare. Tonight is a little bit of a different meeting than what we would normally have. This is a special planning and community development meeting. This isn't a full council meeting. So on this committee, we have 4 councillors, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Alice Lutz, and Councillor Mike Shanks, as well as myself as the chair. And those are if there are any motions that come up, those are the council members that can vote on them. The other members are here as observers and participants, but they have no voting privileges. Anything that comes out of this in form of a motion would then be a recommendation to council, which full council would then deal with. As many of you know, the #1 topic for local governments in recent years on the Sunshine Coast has been our water supply. And so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to deal with it here. There are many aspects of it that are related to planning. There are also some aspects of it related to public works. But this was felt to be the one we had so many questions about this particular issue of planning and developments going forward, and are there enough water for those developments? So that was one of the things that council passed a resolution on, and that became the basis for this meeting. We're going to have a presentation tonight by members of the SCRD staff on the comprehensive water resource plan. And after that, we're going to have some questions from council and some discussion around that. There have also been questions from council forward and in advance that I believe are a part of the presentation tonight. And then at the end, there's going to be a public question and answer period, as there normally is. And those questions will be directed towards us. If anything comes out of that, then we will follow up with the SCRD as well. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome our partners in local government tonight in SCRD, and I believe we have other members, elected officials here tonight. Of course, very happy to have you all here, as well as the concerned citizens of the Sunshine Coast. So we have one item of business on the agenda, and if I can have somebody move the adoption of the agenda. Councillor Seegers and Councillor Shanks. All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. So there are no appointments of delegations, no committee missions reports, no new business, just one business item. So we'll move to item 6.1 and begin with the presentation. Thank you. And if you just press the button there and I'll acknowledge you to speak. Welcome. And please, if you could, just introduce yourselves for members of the public who might not know you.
Sure, I'm Shane Walkie. I'm the Manager of Utility Services.
And I'm Raphael Shea, Water and Energy Projects Coordinator.
Thank you for having us tonight. We're here to talk about the Comprehensive Regional Water Plan, which talks about the Regional Water Service Area. The Regional Water Service Area covers the areas from Secret Cove down to Langdale, including Sandy Hook area and everywhere in between. It includes the town of Gibson's water area in Zone 3 and all the way down to North Road, the hairpin on North Road. All of that water is fed by gravity most of the year from the Chapman Creek Water Treatment Plant, which is located in Selma Park. And in that system, there's about 10,000 water services and 300 kilometers of water main. On the map up on the screen there, the red area indicates Chapman Creek Watershed. And in the watershed, there's 2 lakes, Edwards Lake and Chapman Lake. And from those lakes, we can modulate valves automatically, remotely, to regulate the water that flows down Chapman Creek, down to the Chapman Creek Water Treatment Plant. And the Chapman Creek Water Treatment Plant can produce about 25 million liters a day from the water from Chapman Creek. It's also, the Regional Water Service Area is also supplemented with water from Grey Creek seasonally and from Chaster Well down in Gibson's seasonally. The Comprehensive Regional Water Plan was adopted in 2013 with a 25-year planning horizon. It was based on a population growth of 2%, but since from 2011 to 2016, we've been seeing about a 1% population growth, not a 2%. It identifies the requirements throughout the water system, including water mains, fire flow, treatment, supply, that are required for us to supply water to that regional water service area. But in the Comprehensive Regional Water Plan, it was determined that the supply was inadequate. The goal was to have a 1 in 25-year drought ability, and it was determined that there was a 1 in 21-year ability. If we were to follow the intensive demand management program, which is what we're doing, by 2036, we would be in a 1 in 15 drought if we didn't supply any more, or find any more supply. The Comprehensive Regional Water Plan discusses existing demand management when the plan was developed, or that was to keep the average daily demand for per capita at the same at about 600 liters per day. But it was chosen, as I said, to go with the intensive demand management, which was to reduce the average daily demand per capita by 20%, or down to 480 liters per day. If going with this program, the implementation costs in 2013 was estimated at $36.3 million, which includes, as I'd said, addressing the supply, treatment, transmission, and distribution for the regional water service area.
Thank you. So the Comprehensive Regional Water Plan speaks to the need to continue using the Drought Management Plan, which was adopted earlier. The Drought Management Plan is our primary tool to prioritize water for human health, fish flows, environmental flows, and fire protection. 2012 was really the first year it was put to the test, and it has since then been updated a few times. And I'm sure you're all aware, but it has 4 different stages: stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, where we see, or where we're hoping to see different reductions in consumption to extend the available water supply. In recent years, we've used the Drought Management Plan more so than in the past, and you can see a table here breaking down the different dates of when we call the different stages. One thing to note is that returning to stage 2, so de-escalating the stages, is really a recent phenomenon that's only started in 2015. Before that, the autumn rains would come in with enough certainty that we would just lift the stages altogether. And another thing to note in this slide is that in 2017, well into November, we were still using water from the lakes, which was the first time that happened operationally. The main reasons we're using the Drought Management Plan more in recent years are twofold. The first is climate change, and the second is the increase in environmental flow needs. So first of all, climate change. What we're seeing is a decrease in summer precipitation and a less reliable start to the autumn-fall rains. Those two elements combined increase the vulnerability of a rain-dependent system, and Chapman is a rain-dependent system. The other aspect is the environmental flow needs, which are now part of the Water Sustainability Act. So that was adopted in 2016, and we hired a biologist to evaluate what the minimum creek flows would be for Chapman Creek, and that's where the 200 liters per second figure has come from, and it represents an increase to the water that we release from the lakes as we learn more and have greater ability to monitor and control that creek flow. Another major aspect to the intensive demand management approach outlined in the Comprehensive Regional Water Plan is universal metering. And this is really the crux of how consumption per capita will be decreased. We're well on our way with the installation schedule. So phase 1 and phase 2 have been completed. And the water meters will help us to save water principally by finding leaks and avoiding waste and raising awareness around consumption. Already, we've been focusing on the first aspect of those savings, which is the leaks side of the equation. And Since January, we've found, or we've helped resolve over 700 leaks on private properties, which has led to over 2 million liters a day saved. And as of our last meter read at the end of October, we had 473 active leaks on the system, and this is all on private property. So we're engaging with all of these property owners. We've had phone conversations and on-site visit with over 400 properties since January, and every time we do another read, we find additional leaks, so we expect these efforts to continue.
Thank you, Raf. So in the Comprehensive Regional Water Plan, there was 3 projects that were identified: the Chapman Expansion Project, the Groundwater Investigation Project, and new storage. And the goal is to double the accessible water available. This picture is of the channel up at Chapman Lake. I'm not sure if it was in 2015 or 2017, but it looked the same both years. What we're looking at here is a drawdown of 2.8 or 2.7. We can draw the lake down to 3.0. So the channel's almost dry, but you can see in the background there's lots of water left in the lake. At the bottom of the picture is the dam, and there's a control structure there, again, that we can automatically adjust from our stations down here to regulate the flow quite closely. And up on the left there, that little square is a helicopter pad, and that's what's up there for infrastructure for us. Of course, it's in the Tetrahedron Park, and the park has a parks management plan, which was established to protect the drinking water. And there's a quote that says, "These watersheds are the only water supply offering sufficient water quality, quantity, and timing of flow for a regionally scaled water supply along the Sunshine Coast." And that's part of the parks management plan. As I said, the lake is 32 meters deep. We currently can access 3 meters, and we're planning on accessing 5 additional meters to double the storage availability in Chapman Lake. The environmental assessment was completed in April of 2017. Did I skip one there? Part of the second project is groundwater investigation, and it's used to supplement. It will be used to supplement the water in the for the Chapman system. Again, the regional water service area. We've identified stage 1 was to identify some locations for drilling, for test drilling, and we found 4 sites that we're interested in. Those 4 sites are near Mahan Road, in Soames Point, in Grey Creek, and in Porpoise Bay near Dusty Road. The second stage, which we have a proposal to do for towards 2018, is to do test drilling at these locations and test out the wells for capacity and water quality. And the third stage is to develop the wells, and that will be obviously after stage 2, verifying the capacities. New storage options. The third part was new storage, and options were identified and reviewed and through a matrix that included social, ecological, and technical aspects, and it was decided to go with the engineered lake. There's going to be a budget proposal considered for 2018 for site investigation for the engineered lake.
And then in all that we do, the communications, outreach, and education is a big part of keeping an open dialogue, but also making sure that we reach the objectives of the intensive demand management. So for all of our projects, we have open houses and fact sheets, but we also have campaigns. Some of them have been completed and some of them are ongoing, like the water treatment plant tours. And most of our efforts moving forward will likely be to continue following up on the private side leaks. So moving forward, I will hand the mic over to Tina, our CFO.
Thank you. My name's Tina Perot. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Sunshine Coast Regional District. So just wanted to provide a little bit of information on the financials for the regional system. So for 2017, there is a operating budget of about $6.5 million, and that's pretty consistent over the past 3 years. The capital budget for 2017 is a little over $11 million, and that really is reflective of the two main projects for the regional water system, which is universal metering, as well as the Chapman Water Expansion Project. So those have been in the budget for a couple of years. So again, we've projected, or we've just shown what the actual capital in 2016 was, which was 2.7, and that does reflect some of those costs for some of those projects that started in those years, and about 1.1 million in capital in 2015. So just to give sort of an idea of where some funding sources come from the regional system, not everything comes through user rates and parcel tax. The function has been very fortunate in receiving some grants from the federal and provincial government in order to support the metering project. The Chapman Water Expansion Project will be funded through debt. We haven't executed those debt because the project hasn't completed. So that went through a public process, through an alternate approval process, which was successful. So we will execute that debt when the project is completed. We also have reserves through the function, and that is really modeled through the comprehensive regional water rates. And so it's aligned with what the requirements are within the function, and it's correlated to the projects going forward. So any modifications to that do impact the rates that are collected each year. So just to give sort of an analysis of what the regional system is compared to the two other water systems in the region, a regional water user will pay approximately $250 for parcel taxes and $260 for user rates. So we do have our proposed rates coming to tomorrow's committee, so we will see where those go, whether or not they're approved for the next. Compared to our north and south Pender, where they're upwards in the 300 range. So parcel taxes in the regional system. So the majority of the parcel taxes, the first kind of shows sort of value in thousands of the budget. So majority of our system is within the District of Sechelt. We also have Sechelt Indian Government District that isn't actually a participant to the service, but is we service that particular jurisdiction through a lot of the leased properties. So it spans the region, right from all the way to Area A, Egmont, Pender Harbor, all the way down to West Howe Sound. So it's a very large geographic area. That concludes our presentation. So if we have any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm now going to turn this over to committee, and also council members. Feel free to jump in with questions. I'll recognize first on the mic as Councillor Inkster.
So I just have a couple questions for staff that I've asked and that you've answered that maybe you can put through us to the community to hear. A couple of questions, if that's okay with the chair to ask the two questions.
Of course. Yeah.
Thank you. The first question is the percentage of users. The parcel tax collection from the District of Sechelt is a good indication of how much money our citizens do put into the system individually. That's good information. But what percentage of our users of the water that we're talking about today comes from Sechelt? That's my first question. And a question that was asked that was, I think I asked it and it was alluded to yesterday that Mr. Walkie mentioned was always the question is there alternative water sources untreated that we could look at for properties? And you had mentioned the length of your piping system. If you want to repeat that again tonight to let the community know the length of your treated water system in kilometers, so that people have an idea, if we look at alternative systems, how much that would have to be to replicate for brown water. So those are my two questions to start, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Inkster. I'll answer the second one first. As I mentioned in our presentation, we have 300 kilometers of water mains throughout the regional district. So if you were to try and duplicate that for, say, grey water distribution, it would be a very expensive venture.
As far as the percent of users that are from the district or within the district of Sechelt, I believe it's slightly under 50%. Yeah, so it's 5309 in the district of Sechelt out of a total of 10,784.
So roughly half.
Yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions from council this time, or committee, sorry? Councillor Shanks.
Yes, the burning question. A lot of people have been asking me, with the approvals that are in place for subdivisions within the district of Sechelt, where do the development cost charges play into your revenues?
So I think that's a very good question, Mr. Chair, because I think the regional district, most certainly whenever a project is proposed, one of the areas going forward as a budget proposal is the groundwater. So one of the things staff are looking at is that would be a great contender for growth-related expansion. So development cost charges would be proposed as part of that expansion. So part of the model, the financial model for the regional system, is that user rates are based and are projected on a 2% growth rate. So that if there are any variabilities to that, it is reviewed annually. So what we do is we look at what was projected in the model, what we're actually experiencing, and we modify the rate according to that. So funding, any development cost charges that are actually received are also contemplated in part of that analysis.
Any follow-up? No, that's okay. Councillor Siggers.
I'm going to follow up on that. So right now, if somebody pays you a DCC charge for water, what happens to that money?
So right now what happens is development cost charges are put into deferred revenue and they're placed into an investment account and they earn interest. And as part of any project proposal, staff presents that as part. For many years now, though, we have not used development cost revenues because they haven't been material enough. Now we're in a position where they are significant. They're in the range between 1 and 2 million. I don't have it here with me, but they are material enough to make a difference in funding a project. So I think that's what's being contemplated as part of the future projects being proposed.
Answer your question. So just if I could paraphrase, then we haven't hit that threshold of collection where a major project could be undertaken. Is that?
And part of our projects, whether or not they're directly correlated to growth, I think has not been the point. So I think now we're at that point where they can be contemplated or considered. And again, it's a board decision.
Okay. Further questions from committee? Councillor Wright, I believe, or Councillor Lutz, first on the mic.
I'd be too long. Earlier, we saw the figures of 700 leaks and what that was giving us in lost water. We haven't gotten to the biggest group of users with meters, being Sechelt at 53%. Is there any, even a guesstimate, to what we may be able to recoup through meters in the district of Sechelt?
Oh, we're going to have to go through the list here. There we go.
Thank you. What we have based our estimates for savings from the metering program at around 20 to 30% is based on the experience in other communities. And that would be a combination of the leak resolution as well as the awareness raising process. Yeah, so 20 to 30% is what we're expecting.
Thank you for that. I believe that we had a lineup down here, so we'll turn now to Councillor Wright for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The water plan was developed in 2013. You're already 5 years into this water plan and you got a 25-year horizon. So 25% of your time is gone. And other than water meters, I see very little results in terms of additional water volume available to the Sunshine Coast. My thoughts are well documented at the board level and with the administration. I think your plan is out to lunch. You look at the people here, you look at the letters to the editor, you look at the emails that we get. If you were running a private business with this kind of service and you had 50% of your customers that were unhappy, you'd be out of business. So I think that there's something radically wrong with the plan that we've got. We're 5 years down the road and we've got nothing to show for it other than some water meters. And I'm sorry, it just doesn't make sense to me. We need to move this thing forward. We've got growth going on the Sunshine Coast, both in Sechelt and up and down the coast, and we're not addressing the water at all. So how close are we to having this pipe, okay, approved by the provincial government, the one that's going in at 8 meters? Are we going to get that before the new year? Because if we don't, you know as well as I do, next summer is going to be gone already, and that's when you have to do that installation. How close are we? Yeah. No, you don't have to answer. You've already answered the question, I guess.
Well, so staff can help answer. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So staff and the board have made the request to the province, and certainly the board did meet with the minister while at UBCM. We understand that the new Minister of Environment does have the briefing notes prepared, and we are waiting to hear from the province. We've asked for some communication, and we understand that that's going to be forthcoming shortly. But at that point, this is all we have to share. So whether or not that will happen before the year end, I'm probably saying no, because it does take an act of legislation in order for this to happen. So the earliest that would happen would be the spring of 2018.
Thank you. Thank you. And any follow-up? No.
I'll let somebody else go ahead.
Okay. So I believe the next question is Councillor Inkster.
So you put up on the earlier presentation a number of projects that have occurred in areas throughout the Sunshine Coast over the last number of years. And as I recall, when we were considering dealing with this issue a number of years ago, the metering was one of the proposals, but we were also looking at sourcing in certain areas. And as part of that, the North Coast received some funding as grants, as you may recall, in order to put in some infrastructure in those areas. And if in fact you don't have this tonight, if you can get it for me at the other table, and then I guess we'll have to share it back through this one if the community would like to know if in fact there were grants applied for as part of the central Sechelt Chapman system over those number of years. If you can recall, it's a tough question, but that's one of the ways that we give an indication not only to the board, the staff, but the citizens that there was a plan in place to look for grants as well as utilizing users' capital to put infrastructure in place to meet the growing need.
There we go.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we'll have to bring that back to you in the future to make sure that we're accurate.
Thanks for that. I believe a question from His Worship, the Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a few questions. They're around supply issues, and I just want to try and that's all what I've been trying to get my head around for some time here. But first, I want to thank you for being here. It's important, as you can see from the public attendance. It's also important for our council, and not just because we're largely a large user of the water and that we look for the retail, but but there's a continual sense that in fact it's the District of Sechelt that's responsible for the retail water distribution. And even as recently as today's paper that came out in the local, we have a letter to the paper once again. I want to publicly thank the Mayor and Council of the District of Sechelt for once again allowing us to experience the thrill of water rationing. It's like visiting the Mojave Desert or Dubai or even California without having to bother with all that airline nonsense and spending money on hotels. I'm reading that out because I would say that 90% of the letters to the editor and the papers in the last year and a half on water have not been corrected in terms of the fact that it's actually not the District of Sechelt, but the regional district. I've yet to see a letter asking for the resignation of the infrastructure chair or of the chair of the regional district, though that may happen in the future. But so the public sees us as responsible, and so we need to address it for that reason alone. But the issues that I really want to get to are supply. And in your review of the comprehensive water supply, you indicate that you found there was not an adequate supply. You were hoping to have enough supply to meet a 1 in 25 year drought. And in fact, you found in 2012, you only had enough supply for 1 in 21 year droughts. But the other reality, you put up 2 slides later, we've reached stage 4 in 2012, 2015, and 2017, which is 3 years in the last 5, which sounds a lot more frequent than 1 out of every 21 years. It sounds to me like 60% of the last 5 years have been at our emergency stations. So we clearly don't have enough supply, and that's the issue that everyone's dealing with. We really support the water metering. We think that's the quickest and easiest way to get new, fresh supply of actually treated water. And it looks like it could be upwards to 5 million cubic liters if we're going to get 25% out of the 25 million that we treat. So that's really good. But we're still missing the supply needs to actually serve the population at what they expect over periods of time. So I'm trying to figure out what's the supply difference between maintaining stage 2 year-round, so we go to 3-day-a-week sprinkling, 4 hours a week, 6 hours a week, I think it is, and some conservation measures, but we keep that through August, September, October, November. If we were to give that level of service to the community and not drop to stage 3 and not drop to stage 4, do you have any sense of what that supply gap would actually be for a period of time, or is it too big a number?
For response.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That number is highly dependent on consumption, which is highly correlated to temperature and precipitation. But what we can say is, looking at recent experience, the difference between stage 2 and stage 3 is approximately 75 liters per second. So that would represent about 7 million liters per day.
Mm-hmm. So if we were going to maintain that for 90 days, we could figure out exactly how big our reservoir would need to be. Because that's what I'm trying to get at. We need to find out how much supply we need to maintain our level of consumption. And in fact, our levels of consumption are not that variable. If you look over the past few years, we go to stage 2 at almost July 10th. Last 3 or 4 years, we come into stage 3, depending on precipitation, yes, but there's some pretty firm numbers. We looked at our personal data last couple of nights ago at home, and our records show that we're within a week on most of these. So it's pretty dependable what we do. So I think we could actually identify what our supply needs are. I think when we do, we'll realize our supply is really inadequate, totally inadequate. Okay, so that's the first thing I would like to see a recognition about, that it is inadequate. Therefore, we have a sense of urgency that we haven't seen in the last few years, but a sense of urgency to try and meet that supply. Then the question is, we've got metering for maybe 10-20% of the treated water, and potentially on the books is this drawdown of the Chapman Lake. And I have real difficulty calling it an expansion program, because I don't think it's expanding anything. I think it's drawing down and making the lake smaller rather than expanding our supply, but let's call it the Chapman Lake project. CAO levies just said that it's going to require an act of legislation to occur. And I've been studying political culture in this province since I was in my 20s, and my call on getting an act of legislation that redraws the boundaries of any park, but any Class A park in the province, is a lot less than 50%. It's probably snowflakes chance in hell. And especially under a newly elected government that has ministers of the Crown who have deep roots in the environmental movement, and a government that in fact is dependent on a slim majority of Green players in the House, 3, Andrew Weaver and others. So it doesn't look likely that even if you got the ministry to bring forward the legislation, that in fact the House would support it. Because this is not an order of cabinet, this is not an OIC, this is not a ministerial decree, this is an act of legislation. And we want to think about the politics of that. And if you've lived in the province and you know, you go back, whether it's Strathcona, this would not be a regional district issue. This would be a provincial issue, and I don't think the provincial government that I know that's in power for the last 7 months would be able to pass an act of legislation which rearranged the boundaries of the park. So I think we have to take that into account and plan accordingly. So we have to look at Plan B, which looks like the engineered lake. So that's important. We want to try and do that. I don't understand the intensive demand management program very well. I understand that it's about conservation, which we all support, but I don't understand where the numbers may have come from, why certain numbers other than other numbers. So my sense is that the community has particular needs for water, given the suburban and rural nature of where we live, and those needs are going to be different than urbanized areas, and we're not going to reach the kind of management levels that you might find in the west side of Vancouver or the west end of Vancouver. I've lived in the west end of Vancouver, and my water consumption on the 22nd floor of a nice high-rise was a lot different than my water consumption in Davis Bay. And I think we have to take that into account when we're figuring out what our needs are and what our supply needs are. So I'm trying to figure out how much water we actually need to meet the current demands at stage 2, because that will tell me how much infrastructure we actually need to look at when we start looking at engineered lakes and why we can't supply that now. So we've missed our supply needs in 3 of the last 5 years, and I don't see anything in the plan that tells me we're going to reach them in the next 3 or 4. So that leaves me find it very difficult to support the plan. So do you have any response to that general sense of the fact that we're behind the 8 ball and the plan's not going to bring us around on the other side of it? Or
in future, feel free to just leave the mic on as well, unless something's coming through.
Thank you, Chair. In the plan, it talks about 500,000 cubic meters a day storage for intensive demand management. And we're certainly following the plan to get access to more storage in Chapman Lake, and we're certainly hopeful that will happen.
500 million cubic meters at 25 million a day would get us through 20 days. But except we only need a certain amount to top up, as you were saying earlier.
Yeah, the thing to consider about the Chapman watershed is that we have significant contributions, especially during precipitation events, from the watershed above the weir, as well as watershed contributions below the weir. So that earlier in the summer is more significant, and as the summer and the droughts move along, become less and less significant through time.
Mm-hmm. I think we have to plan on no precipitation, just because that may happen. But I have questions that I'll come back to, but thank you very much for those.
Thank you, Mayor Milne. I believe Councillor Seegers has been waiting. So,
thank you.
Councillor Seegers.
So I know we have some people from West Sechelt in our audience out here. And one of the concerns that we hear from people in West Sechelt, particularly in the northern part, is low water pressure. They want more water pressure up there. So the concern that we get faced with is we have developments that are coming forward. The water usage gets approved. They're told they have lots of water, and yet we're seeing the impact of that up in the higher elevations. So how do we deal with that piece? When are we going to hear from the regional district that we don't have enough water for these developments? We're waiting. We're anticipating that that's going to come, but we haven't heard that yet. Along with that is, in the water plan, it was talking about reductions in usage, so intensive demand management. The plan had numbers indicating that we should have reduced, what, about 30%, 33% or something by this time? And we're only about 12% reduction is all we've seen since the plan's been adopted. Yet it indicates in here that the treatment plant under the intensive demand management program was to be started, what we were supposed to start expanding in 2020. That's 2 years from now. We haven't had the reduction, but I haven't seen anything come forward around increasing the amount of water that can be treated at the plant. Can you comment on that?
There was a few questions there. Thank you.
Yes.
In West Seashelt, there is a proposed Zone 2A, which would be a different pressure zone in Upper West Seashelt, which will be tied to a development. That when the vacant properties that are in that area are developed, they would fund that change. We've also made changes over the years to that water travels through West Seashelt out to Half Moon Bay. The lower part of the highway is in Zone 1. That area up there is in Zone 2. And Zone 2 continues out to Red Roof's area. And we've made adjustments over the years to that modulating valve that's in that station to hold back water while during the high, to have a minimum pressure. So we've been trying to address those pressure problems over the years. The 33% reduction was between 2010 and 2020. So we still have 3 years to go towards that target, and yes, but this year just with the leaks alone, it's considerable savings that we found. What was your other question?
Treatment center, treatment plant.
The treatment plant. Yes, so the treatment plant is, as you noted, is to be designed in 2019 and built in 2020. And our goal is to have more access to Chapman Lake by that time.
So when will the project actually start showing up on the, in the budgeting process, et cetera? Given that there's going to have to be some planning and stuff, I would assume that there'd be something coming forward then in the 2018 budget?
Should be in the 2019 budget for design in 2019 and construction in 2020.
Okay. I'll watch for it. Oh.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. Did you want to comment on that, Mayor Mill?
If you don't mind. I'm not used to using it at this end. Thanks. That's actually, I was going to ask a similar question, which was, and I guess it would be directed through the chair, past Shane to Tina, in terms of where this is in the 5-year plan. If it's going to be built, I noticed the other day the changes in the water filtration system were going to be in place and finished in 2020. I imagine they would have turned up in the budget in 2015 as part of our 5-year planning process. And for those of us who didn't notice that, you could maybe draw our attention to it. But that's what we look for on all of these in terms of figuring out where they're coming and where they are. When you tell us that the engineered lake was going to be in the 2020s, 22, I think, in the plan, 23, and now it's moved forward to 2018 budget. That makes some sense because I wouldn't have expected it in the 5-year plan, but the filtration system should have been in the plan in 2015.
Please, your mic is on.
Sure. So our capital project planning at the regional district has been more of a year-by-year approval process. Our capital plans have not reflected the full amount just because they're moving, but the regional district is moving towards including the full spectrum of capital projects within the plan with the correlated funding required. with an annual modification. So that is why these particular projects come through as budget proposals in each year. So that is sort of what the Regional District Board, as part of the 2017 budget process, identified, that we need to start incorporating these capital plans on the 5-year cycle. So that is a change within the budgeting process at the Regional District. So they should be reflected in the 5-year plan.
Any follow-up? No. No follow-up? Okay, so then we'll move to Councillor Inkster.
Thank you. So just to remind council, we have a sustainability plan, and perhaps we should be responsible and responsive as part of that plan to talk about water at our own level as well. So, I mean, we're all in this together, so we should talk more about that. The other thing I wanted to ask, though, to the staff, now that they're here, is through us to community, is to tell, to remind us, I guess, and to let the community know what the difference in treatment plant use is between the peak time, which hits capacity, and the winter months, and to give to the consumption of treated water, to give the community an idea of how much the change is between the winter now and the summer, which may give an indication of the increased residents that are here also during the summer, but the increased potential outside use that occurs. So I think that was a question I've asked before, and I've heard the answer, so I think I know you know it. So if you want to repeat it to the community here, that'd be great. Thanks.
Staff to comment?
Thank you, Chair. It's quite well known that it's for the regional district that the summer consumption is basically double what the winter consumption is. And so that's all reflected on outdoor use, whether it's washing driveways or watering your lawn or washing your boat. In the wintertime, we see usages about 10 million liters a day. In the summertime, that's going through the Chapman treatment plant, and in the summertime, they range 20, 22 million liters a day. So if it was wintertime here all the time, it would be 10 million a day.
So the summertime amount is capacity treatment plant. It's at capacity basically at that point in terms of treatment, or near to. That's what I think I was told a little while ago. So thanks, Mr. Chair, if that's what the answer is. Just to confirm.
Yes, thank you. Further question from Councillor Seegers, I believe.
Thank you. I know you've been putting in water meters all up and down the coast, and soon it will be District of Sechelt's turn. When do you anticipate that happening? Have you applied for grant funding to help support that? And if so, have you heard anything about whether or not you've received any?
Yes, we have applied for a grant. We're hoping to hear any day now, and our plan is to install them next year.
Thanks for that.
Sorry, beginning of the, do you have any timing during the year? Are you looking at, what are you wrapping up the project in the regional district at this point?
Yes, the regional district system took about a year to install all the meters. Okay. So we would expect the same in the District of Sechelt.
Okay.
So are you good with that?
So do you have any idea what timeline you're looking at? I mean, we're just looking at giving our residents a heads up. Are we going to be looking at February? Are we going to be looking at December? Do we have any idea when you're anticipating something starting during the year?
From experience with the regional system, once we get approvals, the 5,000 that we installed in the regional system took about a year. So it's just ending now. So
start after the budget process would give us direction to allocate resources to that project.
Okay, so you're waiting for the budget. Once the budget process is complete, and if you've gotten approval and your funding, then you'll be starting at that point.
Yeah, so probably early summer.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. I believe a further question or comment from Mayor Milne.
Thank you very much. I wanted to move to new water sources if I could, just for a moment, and at the end of this I'll have it's a straight yes or no answer, so it should be really easy. So we are talking about new water sources. We learned at the workshop yesterday that the or the cutoff for the potential aquifer wells that they might look at was 500 cubic meters a day. And if it was going to produce at least that much, it would be something worth exploring, though they'd probably need more than that if they wanted to actually bring it into the system. So of those four wells, I'm sure one of them will require a little more discussion with a neighboring jurisdiction, but that'll proceed as it usually does. I'm wondering, and this is a question courtesy of Jeff White from East Porpoise Bay. Has the regional district ever considered the Seashelps Water Resource Center as a source of water? We got 2,500 cubic meters a day coming through. That's pretty much potable, but needs to be treated if you're going to drink it. But it could be used for all sorts of sources. I'm just curious if that's ever been on the radar for the regional water system to look at that as a source. 2,500 cubic meters of treated and ready to use non-potable water.
For response?
I think I'll say more than yes or no, but the SCRD does support non-potable water use, and we've had discussions with District of Seashells staff over the years, and we look forward to more discussions.
A little bit of chlorine would make it potable. Just so you know, around the world, that's why it was put in. It was put in so it could be used. So there have been some discussions with District of Seashells staff. It's good. Thanks. Mr. White will be glad to hear that.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing any mics on, so maybe I'll just jump in here with a question for myself. As the planning chair, you may know that that right now active applications for development. I saw on your list there we have about 5,000 parcels here that receive water service. Active applications are in the ballpark of 2,000 parcels in Seashell. So the cumulative effects of that, do we have a handle on that? Each time we send a referral to the SCRD, we come back that there's adequate water and that will be connected. So that scale, is that something that's been considered, the cumulative effects of that?
What's that?
Probably not to that scale. That's something that would have to be more conversation between staff.
Okay. Yeah, we would appreciate that.
So we have not had an understanding of what is actually in your queue in terms of things, and so I think this is an opportunity for us as local government to come together and talk about what that means, and on all scales. I know water is a particular high interest for the community, and but there are many other things that we would need to consider when we're growing at that rate. Solid waste would be another good example.
Right, and thanks. And I asked the question, we have to deal with these questions. We have to chart an appropriate strategic direction. I understand as staff coming to a meeting like this oftentimes feels like you're in the hot seat, where I'm well aware that your strategic direction was set by the board of directors. Okay, so I'm fully cognizant of that. And with that, we would like a comment from our own staff. Ms. Letman.
It's actually a kind of question. When I first started here at the District of Seashelt in 2006, it was a requirement then for every new development to have individual water metering. So most of the development, I believe, that's happened within the District of Seashelt within the last 12 to 15 years has water meters. Are we aware of any leaks there would be my question. And was it around 2005 that that became a requirement for new development? So since 2005. So I suspect there aren't a lot of leaks because it's newer pipes that are in the ground. So we may not see a huge amount of, we're not talking about every household being metered. There are already a lot of them already metered, as well as every commercial property. That's my understanding. Commercial industrial has to have a water meter on it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Ms. Letman. And I believe there was a follow-up question. I'm not sure who was first in the queue, but we'll just hit the button and see. Mayor Milne.
Thanks. This is a question actually to our staff, and it comes out of the chair's comment about 2,000 parcels in the queue for development. Is it not the case that every one of our development plans and would go to the SCRD as a referral in that process, so that at some level people should have been cognizant of this?
Mr. Chairman, members of council, yes, every development proposal, every OCP amendment is sent to the regional district for comment, and we do not proceed unless water is confirmed. The other thing that should be noted is that we do have over 2% growth within the district of Sechelt within the last 5 years, and that is a thing that we should be cognizant of. And in terms of the water metering and the official community plan as well, predicted that amount of growth, and that official community plan amendment, the last major official community plan was sent to the regional district for comment.
Does that answer your question? Okay, so I'm not sure who's next in the queue, but we'll see. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would suggest that you may want to check the minutes of your meetings, because when I sat on the regional district at an infrastructure committee in about April or May, I indicated to the board and to the administration that we had 1,600 units that had already been in the queue and had approval for water, and that there was about 600 or 700 in the queue coming down the pipe. So you've known about it since back then, and it's documented in your minutes.
Okay, Councillor Shanks.
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman, having lived here for many years. Of course, the underlying issue is the absorption rate on an annual basis and whether or not some of those developments actually move forward. You know, because I mean, I can point to a subdivision where we moved here 40 years ago and there's still 2 lots left in that subdivision, you know, but it is determined by the absorption rate that we can expect, and that will go up and down as the cycle often does. But we have been discovered in the last half dozen years for sure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that comment. It's of course helpful. Councillor Inkster, further question?
So I was just going to ask through you to the staff that's here, and it's basically, in a sense, many of us know the answer to this. It's about scarcity, and the reaction to scarcity is plans to increase capacity, by whichever route, the application of grants to do that, but also within that, at the board level decision making, the consideration of increased rates in order to meet the needed additional infrastructure, and the crossing of our fingers if we apply for grants to go with those rates. So I think if in fact we move forward with an ambitious program, which other than some of the plans that have been put forward, if we look at an ambitious program for additional storage, which is something I've been talking about at the regional district for the last number of months, because it didn't look like the other program would meet the smell test, I guess we'll say, other infrastructure pieces and or plans may mean increased rates. So just to let the public know that may be something that may occur, and it may not be I guess it was $10 that they said would happen next year. We may be looking at $20, $30, $40 one year as an increase, just in order to deal with this issue, because as we have discussed as a council, there's a number of issues coming up, including what we do consume as a population now, but what a number of people are foreseeing as occurring, which is the approval of continuous growth in our population, what a number of people are working in that industry and hoping there's approvals to, that may mean that we have to put a plan together as a community that's accepted by the community to see increased rates in order to meet the infrastructure demand and request. So we need to put our heads around that, because that could be coming. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Inkster. I believe we have another comment from Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I actually have two questions. These are two that were sent to you earlier. And these are questions that are coming up in the community. Question number 7 and 8 on your list, so you can find those. What is the status of securing a new reservoir? And what is the status of negotiations with Lehigh? Because that was one of the sites that was actually determined as a potential site for a reservoir. And who's handling those negotiations?
Staff for comment, or?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So the status of a new reservoir in terms of moving forward, staff have pushed that forward in the plan, and there is a budget proposal that the board will be considering starting next Thursday to start that site investigation. In terms of the actual specifics around Lehigh, there have been discussions in the past. I know that staff were having lots of discussions with the staff there at the mine themselves, Lehigh, but there hasn't been anything recently. In the last little while, most of it is connected to the Water Sustainability Act. And part of that is understanding now that as we move forward with storage, we need to have both a storage license that is connected to tenure and a diversion license. So in effect, for us to be effective with this and sustainable with this, we would need to have some tenure of security over that land in order to move forward. So it is part of that site investigation process now that Water Sustainability Act is in full force.
Thank you. We have Councillor Lutz with a question or comment.
And for a reservoir, what kind of approvals do you need and how long do they take?
Staff for comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this will be a little bit of a new territory for us. So, but we have developed some good relationships at a staff level with the people that actually would be responsible for those authorizations, and they have been providing some guidance on what that process would look like. So we're feeling a little bit more confident. I am in particular feeling more confident that we have some strong guidance on the provincial staff side. So it's really about understanding what type of storage we're looking for. The mayor alluded to understanding that, and that's a good part of this equation here is how much storage do we actually need, and where would it be located, how would it be connected to the system, and staff are prepared to move forward should the board consider that in the budget process.
Thank you. If I could just jump in here with a comment. Of course, in preparation for this meeting, I managed to go through the comprehensive regional water plan, and I put myself in the shoes of the board. Of course, we've had now some more information. We've had multiple drought years in a row. That was not something that was not anticipated by the plan. I get that. I've been viewing this particular issue through the concept of the wide-scale infrastructure deficit that exists in local governments right across Canada, and I think that this has a lot of sides of it that show that. And when I looked at the EDM versus the IDM, I just want to let you know that I think that I feel very strongly that's a false dichotomy, and that it wasn't one or the other, but it could be both, and in fact more. And what we're hearing from our community is that they're looking for a bold capital plan to deal with the issues around water scarcity, and so that's what I've been hearing. That's my comment. Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that bold plan, the storage issue that we're looking at, we would be wise based on what's been happening on our growth over the last number of years, and the fact that we don't know what will happen with our connectivity to Vancouver over the next number of years because of what we've been hearing. We do need a bold plan that doesn't just look at storage nearby or near to Chapman as it stands, but looks at other alternatives that a number of people have been writing letters to the editors suggesting that we start looking at other alternatives in order to access additional supply. So we need to start talking about that very soon. I would also mention too that if we do move forward with the reservoir, that we have to build one large enough to meet the evaporation that will start to occur in May, June every year as we move forward. So, you know, we have to consider those types of things because it's something that we can't, I doubt we could cover it up with the plan that's in place or put a cover over it. So we need to consider the large amount of evaporation that starts to occur when our weather changes and it gets warmer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seekers, or Inkster. Mayor Milne.
Perhaps one question while the CAO is still close to the microphone, and then maybe the committee can start turning our attention to what we think, and thank the SCRD for being here. But we know that there's some significant commercial contracts using the water supply, and in stage 3 and in stage 4, they have other restrictions that we move very quickly so that the commercial ones are under different constraints than domestic users. Probably the largest contract that we have for delivery of water is to the municipality further down the highway, town of Gibsons. And we supply water not through the service, they're not part of the service area, but on a contract to Upper Gibsons. But this is a jurisdiction that in fact has publicly indicated through their own assessment that they have proven reserves for 10,000 residents. So I'm kind of curious if in any time during the droughts of the last 5 years, if we've discussed restricting the water supply to Gibsons, the bulk water that's coming out of a stressed out watershed to Chapman, and told them that they should use their proven reserves in their own aquifer to service their residents. Because it would sure be something I'd bring up.
Any comment from staff on that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So my staff has said in the past years that zone has been restricted, has had the same restrictions, but the type of conversation that the mayor is suggesting has not occurred.
So if the pipes are all in place and it's more or less integrated, then it seems to me that we should think seriously about using known reserves when we're in a drought situation. So that's, okay, the conversation hasn't been had yet.
Correct.
Good. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Milne. Do we have any further questions or comments from council? Okay, it seems like we've exhausted that. So I want to thank once again, sincerely, SCRD staff for coming in and helping us work through this very difficult issue. There's a lot of passion in the community around it. So we really appreciate any guidance you can give us on that. And you have given us plenty tonight. Great, and thanks again to the gathered gallery for coming out and helping us through this too. I believe now, unless there's any further discussion that council would wish to have amongst ourselves, that we could move to adjournment and a public question and answer period. And I'm not seeing, I am seeing a mic. Mayor Milne.
Well, I'm wondering if there's recommendation, having heard this and had a chance to think about it, there's two things that will happen. The minutes of this meeting, and that includes the 3 pages of the SCRD responses. And I don't know if the public has seen that, but the minutes of this will come to a council meeting when we can consider them. Or if there's recommendations from the committee based on what you've heard this evening that would spur council to think about it in the next two weeks when it comes to our next council meeting. That's all I'm wondering, if the committee has any thoughts between themselves that they would like to recommend to council in terms of direction. And that would then become direction to the 2 directors who are sitting on the SCRD board.
Well, as chair of the planning committee, I think one of the things that is stuck out for me is this revelation that the ballpark figure of 2,000 proposed units has not been considered the cumulative effects of that at the SCRD level, and that's something that I would like to see at a future meeting us actually deal with the resolution. I'm not sure if this is currently the time for that, but if there's any comments, yeah, or perhaps at council when these minutes come to council as well. But if there are any committee members that wish to make a motion at this time, we could definitely entertain that. Seeing none, I will then entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Seegers, seconded by Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? Okay, and that concludes the meeting. Thank you, everyone here, for attending. We can now begin the public question and answer period, and all those questions will be directed through us. Please help us and try to keep the proceedings civil and respectful, and I will recognize hands in an orderly motion. So